Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, September 27th, 2024. Time to get going on our Friday show and wrap up the week. It has flown by, as most weeks do, when measured in 2-hour increments anyway. If only the days were just 2 hours long. Why? Well, then I suppose you would say, why, he's on 2 hours a day, 5 days a week. It's nonstop. But things would go a lot quicker, I think, and everyone would enjoy work a lot better. All right, well, let's see. It is Friday. That usually means sweeping out from pocket today, as we are not rewarded. And we press the little gerbil hamster mouse lever, and no pellets come out from Greg Dworkin. And we have to wait until next week to start with that again. But that leaves the slate free for catching up with other stories, hitting the highlights of the day. I don't know if there's any. What's outstanding? I somehow every morning as I get right to the microphone, I draw a blank and say, what have I been talking about for the past half hour or so as I get ready for the show and monitor social media? Something that was of interest and that came up the other day. We didn't discuss it when we had the chance, and this has sort of become standard practice these days, which I guess is the sad part. But I was reminded this morning as my brother Mark sent me this story that let me grab the story. It's probably on the phone. I don't think I got a chance to park it in pocket, but it's the story of North Carolina purging its, quote unquote, purging its voter rolls. I guess it is purging its voter rolls, and it's just sort of generally throwing people off the voter rolls for in some cases, no particular reason. That's the issue. I guess what's really going on here is, or one of my issues here is sort of a failure to look very deeply into what's going on in the reporting. They are reporting this is happening, and that's helpful. But it's, I think, if I saw and remember correctly from social media traffic earlier today, 39 days until the last votes are cast at this point, which, by the way, in almost any other context, like let's say one of the major party presidential candidates has been convicted on 34 criminal counts and is awaiting sentencing, you can't sentence him prior to the election because that would be, disruptive. That could disrupt the election or upend it or influence the election or confuse people or whatever. But you can, 39 days and less prior to the election, tell people who thought that they were registered to vote, no, you're not. We threw you off the voting rolls because you're ineligible for some of the various reasons. And I have here the article that he sent to me, and lots of people have covered this. This one is from The Hill. North Carolina removes 747,000 from voter rolls, citing ineligibility. Ashley Fields is the reporter here, and my guess is that Ashley Fields was writing this up from, wire reports and maybe some additional information, maybe a couple of phone calls down to North Carolina. I don't know if it was done, on the ground. And I guess probably as an editor, pressed for time, do I need to send a reporter to North Carolina to figure out what's going on? Not really. Although you should probably stop and say, well, what's really going on here is Republican-controlled elections offices are looking for as many people that they think are probably Democrats that they can throw off of the voter rolls so that when they show up on election day or request an absentee ballot or whatever, we can say no and keep them from voting for Kamala Harris, and therefore maybe Donald Trump squeaks out a win in the state. So, that's what's really happening, but they, I guess they feel like, well, we can't prove that necessarily. And I don't know if you can, certainly not from, making phone calls from Washington. But even if you went to North Carolina, I don't know if you'd necessarily be able to unearth it without a couple months of investigative work. But it seems intuitive that that's kind of what's going on here? I guess what strikes me about it is this. I'll read on. The basic facts of it are, and I guess this has to do with it too, right? The way it's presented is, well, they had reason for it. And in some cases they did. And then they sort of conflate and blur the lines between, well, some of them we had good reason, and I think everybody can understand it. And some of them, there is a reason, and I've stated it, and I might even be able to say state law permits me to do it this way because of this, but the question then arises, is that really a good state law? It sounds like it might not be. North Carolina's State Board of Elections has removed 747,000 people, and that's about, by the way, well, what it turns out is it's now about 10% of the people who are on the voting rolls. I think later in the story they say they have like 7.8 now million registered voters in North Carolina. 747,000 of them were just chucked off. And again, some for maybe good reason, but check it out the way it's written up. So they've just removed 747,000 people from the list of registered voters within the last 20 months. So, I mean, I guess it's true that this is being announced now. I don't know when they finished their work. And I also don't know how enthusiastically they began their work 20 months ago. 20 months ago, they said, well, let's be prepared to cheat and throw people off the voter rolls. But let's spend 19 months preparing for it. And then in late September, early October of 2024, when it's mostly too late for anybody to do anything about it once they discover they've been thrown off the voter rolls, that's when we'll actually throw them off. I'm not sure exactly what it means over the last 20 months, but I'm sure they've been spreading the work out a little more than that. But officials announced on Thursday this decision to remove 747,000 people in a press release. The State Board of Elections, in the release, said the majority of those stripped from the rolls were deemed ineligible to be registered because they had moved within the state and did not register the new address. Now, if the sentence ended there and the period was there, you would say, all right, well, okay, the majority of the people are people who move within the state and they didn't re-register under their new address, and that's wrong. You should register under the address you have. We can't let you vote in districts you don't live in, et cetera, et cetera. So fine. Well, no, but there's more. It's a comma at the end of that. The State Board of Elections said that they stripped the majority, I guess, of those stripped from the rolls were deemed ineligible to be registered because they'd moved within the state and did not register the new address, or because they did not participate in the past two federal elections, prompting an inactive status. So now you're ineligible because you're inactive. Which is interesting because everybody resists any movement to make voting compulsory in any way. We can't have that. That's un-American. And yet, if you miss two federal elections, they're like, well, you're out. You didn't move. You're not faking where you live. You're not a false registrant. You're not a foreign national. You're just a regular American who has decided for whatever reason the last two federal elections didn't interest you very much. And that's odd in its own right, but a lot of people are like that. And in fact, most of the Trump voters that they chase are people who are like that. People who are, plenty of MAGA voters will tell you the first time they ever voted was 2016. Plenty will tell you 2020. I wasn't sold in 2016, but by 2020 I was. And also, the last two federal elections, that's also a very stringent standard. The last two federal elections were 2020 and 2022. And this is the next opportunity. So, you are talking about somebody who could be, I turned 18 in the middle of the onset of the pandemic. I registered to vote because I could do that by mail. Whatever happened, the pandemic kept me from voting in 2020. I didn't want to go and stand in line, and I didn't really think about it until too late, and I couldn't get an absentee ballot. And I wanted to vote, it was my first federal election. I had just turned 18, but I just felt like the risk was too much. By the time 2022 rolls around, you are now 20 years old. You've not yet voted in a federal election. And, I don't know, let's say, for instance, let's say the pandemic is still ongoing. But okay, most of us has given up on masks by that point and probably would have been willing to go stand in line. But let's suppose that the line is super long and you got there because you worked all day with 30 minutes left before the polls closed and the line was out the door. And you just said, yeah, I mean, it's a midterm election in North Carolina. It's just not going to affect that much. I'm going home. I can't wait that long. You don't know that if you're in line at the time, they have to let you vote. And even if you do know that, what if it takes 6 more hours to get in there and cast your vote so that you can cast a vote for the Democratic candidate for North Carolina's whatever congressional district and watch them lose, 75-25 in an overwhelmingly red district? Do you wait in line? Well, do you wait in line if you know at the time that if you don't cast this ballot, they're going to kick you off the voting rolls and not let you vote in 2024? In your third federal election, you're out. Everyone knows. I mean, I guess you should know that by now, right? Everybody knows. 2 strikes and you're out. That's how it works in America. It's super intuitive. Everybody should know that. If you don't vote twice in a row, well, you're not allowed to vote now. But I mean, the whole MAGA movement was people who didn't vote and then were motivated by a wacko fascist. Yeah, I should be a fascist. I'm going to go out and vote for that guy. But I don't know. None of them seem to have been purged from the rolls anywhere along the line. But okay, it's the regular MAGA voting integrity hypocrisy. And it's clearly targeted. And I'll bet that there are plenty of people who fit the profile for rural MAGA voters who didn't vote in 2 federal elections in a row who are still on the lists anyway. But, I mean, that one really strikes me as super suspicious and one that doesn't belong in, I don't know, my grammar. Is that a subjunctive clause? I don't remember what that is. I just remember that that's a term. But a subordinate clause? It's a sub-something clause because it's barely part of the sentence. You're not supposed to notice it, right? Well, the majority of those stripped from the rolls are deemed ineligible. That's another thing, too. Really? Okay, so 50% plus 1, at least, of the people stripped from the rolls were deemed ineligible. Well, I don't want ineligible people on the list either. But why were they ineligible? Well, one of the reasons they were ineligible is they're eligible. They just didn't vote twice in a row. That's not really ineligible. That's, distracted, lazy, dissatisfied with the choices they're being presented with. Something else other than ineligible. Well, okay, they're inactive. Yeah, all right. And so therefore ineligible. And by the way, that's only the majority. I would like to know about how the minority of them were removed from the list. So the minority of them were removed from the list because they're black. Oh, well, why didn't you say so? Well, I would be accused of racism if I had done that. And then it's just sort of reported that way, like, the majority were stripped from the rolls because they were deemed ineligible. And, what makes you ineligible? Oh, I don't know, stuff like moving within the state and not re-registering at your new address. Oh, we can all agree on that. Or they were given inactive status. Well, inactive. I guess inactive sounds like ineligible. So I guess that's okay. There's an IN and then a vowel, a couple more syllables. So it's more or less the same thing. But about that majority thing, what about the minority? I don't know. We don't see anything about that, and no one's curious about it, I guess, except us. Other reasons for removal included death. That's a great one. I mean, among the worst to experience, I would think. But, some people are ready for death. The sweet release of death. I won't have to vote anymore. I was facing my 3rd federal election in a row, dissatisfied with my choices. Was going to vote for RFK Jr., but then he dropped out, even though he's suing to get off the ballot, or is he suing to get on the ballot in North Carolina? Which one is it he's suing for? I don't know. He's suing for both in different states, as you know. Well, death, okay. Not only will I not dispute that, they won't dispute that. That's the important point. Also, felony convictions, which is a shakier one, but it's traditional. The Supreme Court would say it's fine. It has a long history in this country. Doesn't make any particular sense, of course. You're still a citizen, even if you have been convicted of a felony. And everyone gets down on people convicted with felonies, unless of course they're the candidate. That's true. I forgot about that. If they're the candidate convicted of the felonies, that's okay. If you want to vote for the candidate who's convicted of a felony, you better not be convicted of a felony. And you know the reason why they want people who have been convicted of felonies off the voter rolls? They're afraid, I guess. Well, you don't want that, because people who are convicted felons who are allowed to vote, they'll vote for people like them, convicted felons, and we can't have that happening. Unless, well, you see, I think what's going on here. I've always been curious about that. Like, why can't you, I thought you serve your time, you redeem yourself, you re-enter society. One of the things we want out of people leaving prison is, I'm going to be a solid citizen now. I'm going to register to vote. Well, sorry, you can't. You were once convicted of a felony. And, at this point you might say, the guy I was going to vote for was convicted of a felony. Or, no, I'm gone so straight, I intended to register. And though presented with the opportunity to vote for a convicted felon like me, I actually said I would rather vote for a better role model and re-enter society and possibly run for lieutenant governor of this state and then, move on with my life. You also can, of course, be removed from the list by moving out of state. That one makes sense. Personal requests for removal, that seems like logical enough, unless you're RFK Jr. asking for yourself to get off the ballot. That all admitted by the board. You die, you move out of state, you get convicted of a felony but aren't the actual candidate. Those are reasons for us to purge you from the list. North Carolina is one of 7 swing states likely to decide the presidential election between Harris and Trump. We'll shorten it a little bit. Only one Democrat this century. Former President Obama in 2008 has won the state in a presidential contest, but Harris has been polling close to Trump. The state is also home to a tough gubernatorial contest, no it isn't, between Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson and Democratic Attorney General Josh Stein. It is not a tough race. Stein is going to stomp the ever-loving crap out of Robinson because Robinson is he's a weirdo, like the rest of them, to say the least. The purge comes just a few weeks after North Carolina Republicans filed a lawsuit that said the state had failed to act on complaints about ineligible people on voter rolls. In the GOP lawsuit, a Wake County resident in North Carolina claimed that voter registration forms in that county did not include driver's license and social security numbers. Yeah. I mean, not the ones we gave to you, buddy. Anyway, by failing to collect certain statutorily required information prior to registering the applicants to vote, defendants placed the integrity of the state's elections into jeopardy, the lawsuit read. But did they? Is it in jeopardy? They placed it there, but did it escape jeopardy by actually registering people correctly? We didn't look. Republicans also filed a lawsuit recently raising concerns after state-approved digital IDs issued by the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, their flagship university, as a valid form of voter ID. So it's issued by a state agency to people who, by the way, do give their social security numbers and what else? Social security number and driver's licenses to the issuing agency. But they're young, and some of them are black, too. And so you have to do something about that. And anyway, but Republicans sued about that. Oh, by the way, they lost. Their claim was rejected by a local judge. Thank you. That's good news. The state now has around 7.7 million registered voters. The Hill has reached out to the North Carolina State Board of Elections for comment. There's the phone call I was telling you about. And they didn't get an answer. So I don't know. I guess they're working off of wire reports probably there. But yeah, that's just poor everything all around. I mean, at least you can say about the elections officials, well, they intended to mistakenly, or without real basis, throw people off of the voting rolls. But this reporter, I think, meant to reveal the true story of what was going on in North Carolina, recognizing that it was important, but didn't really, doesn't seem to have paid attention to what they were being told. I just got to get the story filed. I mean, the fact is that they were purged from the rolls. So that's out there. Who, what, where, why, when, how. Those are the basics, right? Who? 747 voters. I mean, that's not really who, but you can't list everybody. What? They got purged from the rolls. Where? North Carolina. Why? Well, the State Board of Elections didn't answer my phone calls, but the AP Newswire got an answer, and they said it was because people were either ineligible because they had moved and not re-registered, or they died, or they left the state, or some kinds of other reasons. But that's the majority of them. The minority I didn't mention. Who, what, where, why. So I got about a quarter of the story here. Where, why, when, over the last 20 months, except for some reason it's news now, and how. Well, they were elected or appointed to, I don't know, to the State Board of Elections, so they have that authority. Okay, but I still feel like major chunks are missing. The what? What, where, why. I guess the why really is the big part, although it's tied to the what. Anyway, you get the idea. No one asks that question. The majority of them were ineligible. Well, what about the minority that weren't ineligible? What was wrong with them? That might have been, well, those are the ones who are inactive. I don't count inactive as ineligible. I count that as a separate category. All right, well, tell me more about that category. Well, those are the people who didn't vote in 2 federal elections in a row. And think about how easy that is, right? I mean, they didn't purge you until 2024. But again, if you're 18, you register, pandemic, you don't go to the 2020 polls, you don't realize that you should have gotten an absentee ballot. Next time I'll do better. But then next time you say, well, I don't need an absentee ballot now. I'm going to go and vote. You get there, the line's really, really long. Right? Now, by 2024, you find when you go to vote, you are purged from the rolls. But when did your ineligibility kick in? If the rule is you don't vote in 2 federal elections, it's 2 years after you registered, basically, and maybe a month or 2 after that. I don't know, depending on when you registered, right? You register in 2020, pandemic hits, you don't show up for the vote. 2022 rolls around, you're working late, you missed your chance, you don't go in, you vote. In 2022, on November, 15th, middle of the month, whatever, if the State Board of Elections decides to get on the ball and do their magic on purging the rolls, they could have chucked you off before the end of 2022. You registered in 2020. That's it. That guy, he's never going to vote. Throw him off that can't be. I mean, it is, but it's not a logical basis. But somewhere, I'm sure, in a Republican supermajority legislature, they said, we'll authorize that by law because we know exactly how it's going to be used. Well, anyway, I don't know. North Carolinians, you should march to Raleigh and, I don't know, blow raspberries at the Capitol or something. You really, I mean, honestly, if you were Republicans, I would be able to tell you, yeah, go and sack the place, burn it down, and I'll pardon you all. But, we don't do that. Yeah, but it's a serious thing. I mean, it's going to affect the outcome of the election. And it's happening in more states than just North Carolina. Be sure of it. In fact, I see every day probably the most repetitive story I've seen and that I haven't mentioned to people, in addition to, hey, we're kind of running out of time to really have an impact with your donations, even if you go directly down ballot with it. But there's still time, and you should absolutely be doing that. But the other thing I see people reminding everyone else of is you can look online and see whether you're still registered. And I know that lots of people say, there's no way I am not registered. I've never had that issue. Every time I go to the polls, I'm registered. It's never come up. I have voted in the last 2 federal elections, so they quote unquote can't throw me off the rolls. I don't know what the rules are in every state. And I don't know if North Carolina actually followed its own rules either. That question is not asked and answered, and you really should be asking that. But anyway, you can check online, and I forget exactly how you do it, but there's a million ways to do it, and if you go and you Google, check my voter registration, there are several centralized databases, and each state has their own, and you are encouraged to go and look. I saw somebody today on social media saying, I encouraged like 20 people I knew to go and, I cajoled them into checking their registration. And it's not a huge number, but like 3 of them who swore, there's no way I'd be deregistered, found out that they had been deregistered. And the sooner you find that out, the better. The sooner you can remedy it. In many states, even where they have same-day voting or same-day registration, It's true you can re-register and cast a ballot, but it's a provisional ballot and it gets put in a different envelope, and it's the kind of thing that Republicans then show up and say, don't count those because they're probably from Democrats. And then, then your vote is questionable. And it's a real pain in the ass if you want to verify that your vote was actually counted. You got to waste a lot of time. You should waste that time up front now getting registered instead and checking your registration. Could be a mistake was made. Could be they found out you were a Democrat. Could be a random error. So you might as well check now. Okay, so that's one thing. And there's more, as it turns out, all over the place. So let's read a couple of other things. J.D. Vance is back in the news. He's running for vice president. He should be in the news. But he's extremely weird, which is why he's in the news. And there's new news about why he's weird, although we are coming up to the break because we spent a lot of time ranting and raving about North Carolina. It's by the way, I guess we'll rant one more thing about North Carolina. I guess I was curious too to see, if you had sent a curious reporter down to North Carolina to this press conference. I don't know if there was one. Maybe they just issued a press release. There was no event to go to, and maybe all of these questions were in the email to the North Carolina Board of Elections, and they didn't respond, and that was all you were allowed to print. They didn't respond. But what about a question like, you say that you're deeming people inactive if they haven't voted in the last 2 federal elections. And federal. That makes it sound like it's official and reasonable. Can't question the federal thing. Well, but why is it federal? Like, you're North Carolina State Board of Elections. Like, what if you didn't vote in the last 2 federal elections, but in the middle you voted in a special election for state legislature? Do they throw you off? Well, you didn't. The rule is federal. But why is it federal? You're a state government, and every time somebody sues about these things, they keep coming back and saying, states rights, states this, states that, federal elections, rules. I don't know. All of a sudden, nothing.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or 2 would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I see that the question as posed on social media, why are you ineligible if you don't vote in federal elections, has gotten some traction, but I guess no answers so far. I wonder what elections law experts have to say about this. I should look it up at some point, but I just assume it's like, well, the line had to be drawn somewhere, and a supermajority of the legislature are Republicans, and they know that statistically speaking, most of the people who will be thrown off the rolls that way are Democrats, and they just approve that as the answer. And, to anybody who asks questions, they say federal elections, 2 federal elections. Those are obviously important, and therefore, if you don't vote in them, you definitely deserve to be purged from the rolls because federal, and who's going to get in the way of federal? I don't know. It's just sort of one of those things where there's hand waving going on and magical thinking. Like if I just say ineligible/inactive, federal election, something, hey, the law says it's okay, then, no one will stop and say, why does the law say it's okay? All right. In breaking news, because that's the business we're in, sort of. I don't know. We're in that business if I have social media open and people start saying, hey, there's breaking news. There is breaking news. Maggie Smith has died. well, I'll have to just give you what they tell. I know who Maggie Smith is. I think I know that most of you probably know who Maggie Smith is. But since this is in front of me, Maggie Smith dies at 89. I always found that phrasing interesting. Well, you know, at 89 years old, okay, I understand that. But at 89, I don't know. They die at 89. Like, you know, people die at all over the place. I don't know. I always found that an odd way of putting it. But that's beside the point. I should be paying attention to Maggie Smith. The Oscar-winning British actress enchanted audiences in the, they chose to go with the Harry Potter films and Downton Abbey. I'll stick to Downton Abbey on that one because, of course, the Harry Potter franchise now politically fraught, which is really too bad on a number of levels. But you probably know why. At any rate, Maggie Smith would have had, I think, nothing to do with any of that. Plenty more that you could be admiring Maggie Smith for. And, you had your chance. You had 89 years to do it. If you haven't gotten that opportunity so far, you're late, and you can do it in eulogy form. So sad to hear. She's been preparing audiences for it for a long time, dying in films and series and movies for quite a while now. But, she was fantastic and will be missed. But I don't know. I think she did us a favor by dying on Downton Abbey and preparing us all for the death. So we've all already wept for Maggie Smith's death. And, well, there you have it. All right. Do I, grab I guess I'll grab a link to the breaking news story at the Washington Post about it. Because I've said it, and that's the habit here on the show. All right, so there were other things I wanted to tell you. Oh, yes, right. J.D. Vance, super weird again, and here are ways in which that has happened. One is weird because he's the vice presidential candidate now, and it's awkward because, as we all know, he's been very critical of Trump in the past, but he changed his spots so that he could get on the ticket, which is also amazing because, you know what? It's interesting. J.D. Vance has been a senator for less time than some of the people purged from the North Carolina voting rolls were, quote unquote, inactive, right? The example we gave of the person who registers in 2020 but somehow doesn't vote in 2020 or 2022 becomes ineligible in 2022. Now, they purged them in 2024 because that's when you got to do it, to have an impact in the presidential race. But you were ineligible in 2 years plus a day or two, depending on when you registered. J.D. Vance has not yet been a senator for 2 years, but is the vice presidential candidate. Less time has passed since the inactive voters may have registered than from when J.D. Vance, one, was a civilian with no elective experience whatsoever, and two, was running for office saying that Donald Trump was an idiot and he hated his guts and the guy doesn't know what he's doing. And then, less than 2 years later, he's the biggest suck-up on the planet, and because he's the biggest suck-up on the planet, his sons say that's the guy who should be running as vice president. So his sons are also dumb, is the other subtext of this story. So, what today's new breaking story of something that J.D. Vance said about why Donald Trump sucks has come to light. The Washington Post has the story. They've written it up in, long, overbearing fashion. Let's see what it takes to get through it. Or maybe just the headline will do. J.D. Vance, in 2020 messages, said Trump, quote, thoroughly failed to deliver. Deliver what? Let's find out. In previously undisclosed messages, and if you don't disclose within 2 years, they purge you from the message rolls. In previously undisclosed messages, the future vice presidential nominee said Trump had not fulfilled his economic agenda and predicted he would lose to Biden. And by the way, he won in that, was it that election? No, 2022, before he actually was running for office and won. Peter Jameson wrote this up for the Washington Post. Vice presidential nominee J.D. Vance has a go-to explanation for his evolution from outspoken critic to impassioned defender of Donald Trump. He says he was converted by Trump's achievements in the White House. This is a good start, I think, to the article. We've seen him, taken to task for hypocritical spot-switching remarks in the past, but he was converted by Trump's achievements. Now, this is previously undisclosed things in which he says he doesn't have any achievements. So, he's a hypocrite. Vance has said watching the former president enact his populist agenda for left-behind Americans transformed him from a never-Trump conservative in 2016 to an always Trump supporter in 2020. He just says a Trump supporter. But Vance privately expressed a very different verdict on Trump as the former vice president's first term was nearing its end, previously unreported messages obtained by the Washington Post show. In the direct messages sent during Trump's final year in office to an acquaintance over the social media platform then known as Twitter, still known as Twitter, Vance harshly criticized his future running mate's record of governance and said Trump had not fulfilled his economic agenda. Quote, Trump has just so thoroughly failed to deliver on his economic populism, parentheses, accepting a disjointed China policy, end parens, Vance wrote in February of 2020. It wasn't post-insurrection. It was election year, 2020. Okay, so early on, I guess we're talking about the non-contested early primaries in the Republican Party. And prior to the American reaction to the global pandemic that would kill millions. Anyway, he offered a prediction as well. Joe Biden, he believed, was going to win the 2020 election, which, did we know in February 2020 that he was the nominee? I guess not. So, I guess good prediction. I think Trump will probably lose, he wrote. Oh, here we are. That was a February one. In February, he says, Trump has thoroughly failed to deliver on his economic populism. Then in June of 2020, when we did know that Biden would be the nominee, or at least it was pretty close to clear. I don't remember. Well, when was their convention? It was settled before the convention, right? I think Trump will probably lose, he wrote in a message in June of 2020, a few months before ballots were cast in an election that Vance would later claim, falsely and repeatedly, was stolen by the Democrats. I think Trump will probably lose. So, and then a few months later, no, I think Trump actually totally won and it was stolen from him. And my plan is to run for office in 2022, win, and then make my next campaign in my entire life one for vice president by sucking up so hard. The critical messages shared with the Post by their recipient on the condition of anonymity because of concerns about retaliation. You should always be afraid of that. It's their platform. Retaliation. Cast doubt on Vance's oft-recited account of how and when he embraced Trumpism. I can't believe he's lying about this. They were written years after Vance's previously reported remarks attacking Trump, such as his... Oh, I'm sorry. I said before, didn't I? But they were written years after, unless I read it correctly the first time. You tell me. I mean, there's tape for me to review, but not for hours. They were written years after Vance's previously reported remarks attacking Trump, such as his statements in 2016 that Trump was reprehensible or cultural heroin and possibly America's Hitler. And that's not a sitcom. I made it sound like ABC presents America's Hitler, 8/7 Central. In a statement, Vance spokesman William Martin, I don't think I've ever really noted that guy's name. Vance's spokesman, huh? All right, well, keep an eye on that guy. So he said that Vance's 2020 assessment of Trump's failure to deliver on his economic policies was not meant as a criticism of the former president. Oh, no? Really? I mean, it's the economy, stupid. That's the only thing that matters. Did he deliver on his economic policy? No, but, that's not meant as a criticism. It's meant... what? How does he phrase this? This was not meant as a criticism of the former president, but of establishment Republicans, who thwarted much of Trump's populist economic agenda to increase tariffs and boost domestic manufacturing in Congress. Trump has so thoroughly failed to deliver on this that I don't even think it's his fault. Martin added, "Fortunately, Senator Vance believes that Republicans in Congress are much more aligned with President Trump's agenda today than they were back then, so he's confident that they won't run into the same issues within the party. All right, they won't be needing Congress for their agenda this time." Vance's campaign did not respond to questions about his prediction that Trump would lose the 2020 election. While Martin and Vance recalled the 2020 exchanges, he criticized the Post for not identifying the person who disclosed the messages and for not sharing with the campaign the entirety of the conversation, portions of which were withheld to protect the person's anonymity. Martin said the Post was engaged in nothing more than unethical journalism. I thought you were supposed to say nothing less than, but okay. Vance has never pinpointed a moment when he became a fully committed Trump supporter, probably when the call came in. "You're my VP." All right, well, then I'm all on board. Instead, describing a gradual conversion away from his earlier views, it was complete by the end of Trump's first term. I bet he's clearer on the moment when he discovered that he wanted to be Catholic. Anyway, he was moved to, quote, change my tune about President Trump from 2016 to 2020, and he voted for Trump in 2020. He has sought to isolate his critiques of Trump to a chapter of his life that is now in the distant past, like his non-Catholic past. Like a lot of people, I criticized Trump back in 2016, Vance said, shortly after he began campaigning for Senate in 2021. And I ask folks not to judge me based on what I said on 2016 because I've been very open that I did say those critical things and I regret them, and I regret being wrong about the guy. I think he was a good president. I think he made a lot of good decisions for people, and I think he took a lot of flack. That's actually the most normal thing he's said about the subject. But it's also indicative of, is this guy ready for prime time? I don't know. It's only been like a couple of months since he totally converted in politics, did a 180. People do that, but that's why you don't elect them until later when they sort of kind of have decided what they stand for. Anyway, but the messages show that Vance still took a dim view of Trump's achievements long after 2016, and after almost 4 years of observing how the man he now calls the best president of my lifetime behaved in office. In fact, during the same June 2020 exchange, when he said Trump was likely to lose the upcoming election, Vance seemed to suggest he'd been offered a position in the Trump administration. He claims he had rejected it. This is interesting because in June of 2020, he hasn't even run for Senate yet. But he was being offered a place in the administration, I guess based on his book, maybe? But based on his book and saying the guy's a Hitler. How would you like a position in Hitler's administration? Well, I would not. And that makes sense, but the offer doesn't make any sense. I've already turned down my appointment from the Emperor, Vance wrote, adding a winking emoji. I'm lying. After his interlocutor referred to the possibility of a government appointment by Emperor Trump. Pressed by his acquaintance about what job he had been offered, Vance replied, "I'm not going to say over Twitter Messenger." Yeah, operational security, right? I know this could get out. Oh, it got out? Outrageous! I demand to know how it got out. Okay. Neither Trump nor Vance has ever disclosed that he was offered a role working for Trump before he was selected as the GOP vice presidential nominee in July. The Vance campaign did not address questions about whether Vance had been offered a job. He probably wasn't. The exchanges are further evidence of Vance's penchant for engaging in prolific and sometimes incautious dialogues with digital pen pals, including a 20-month texting conversation with the far-right blogger and conspiracy theorist Charles Johnson. Vance rose to fame, unfortunately, in 2016 with his critically acclaimed memoir, Hillbilly Elegy, about growing up in a Midwestern family riven by drug addiction. The Yale Law School graduate who at the time worked as a venture capitalist in Silicon Valley, he established his reputation as a fluent communicator on despair of the white working class and as one of a minority of conservatives opposed to Trump, whom he described as leading the white working class to a very dark place. So while that was a path to fame, he used it. And then when he found out that there were new heights to be scaled by sucking up to Trump, he switched to that. Vance said he voted for independent presidential candidate Evan McMullin in 2016, but changed his mind. Oh, yeah, that's right. We were trying to remember who was the independent in 2016. Just the other day, Evan McMullin, but changed his mind about Trump over the next 4 years because, as he put it in 2021, he actually honored his promises in the White House, which the previous year, 2020, he said he didn't honor his promises. 2021, he said he did. The messages obtained by the Post reveal Vance in a garrulous and seemingly unguarded mood. He was a nobody, and it was easy to do. He wrote them after initiating contact with their recipient who published or whose published writing interested him. In their exchanges, Vance criticized the left in a way that aligns with his more recent public statements, worrying about the woke stuff and saying he believed progressive Democrats will inevitably be co-opted by financial elites. He also talked about his belief that government policy should make it easier for women to stay out of the workforce to care for their children if they desired to do so. That was a nicer way of saying it as opposed to, they're baby machines, use them for that. He also expressed views that appeared jarringly at odds with the positions he would soon adopt as a politician. In one message, he mused about how the far right focused on harm caused by pandemic lockdowns while underplaying the dangers of the coronavirus. I'm sympathetic to the idea that there's a lot of long-term economic damage being done, but it's always draped in this bizarre desire to pretend the virus itself isn't a problem, he wrote in May of 2020. The next year, as a Senate candidate, Vance denounced what he described as a cabal of public health experts led by the White House advisor Anthony Fauci that said he was seeking to suppress American liberties with unreasonable pandemic restrictions. As a senator, he pushed to ban federal mask mandates. Martin, the Vance campaign spokesman, said, just like billions of other people all over the world. Okay. Senator Vance's views on COVID in May of 2020 were not the same as his views on the pandemic in 2021. And in another of the 2020 messages, he expressed openness to a holy grail of the progressive left, a government-run universal health care system, or Medicare for all, which is now, of course, is Hitler socialism. In a February 2020 message, Vance wrote that M4A, as he called it, is maybe a net positive, maybe not. Details matter. Thanks for the insight. Medicare for all, a plan in which the government would provide health insurance to every citizen, effectively replacing private health insurance industry, was briefly endorsed by Kamala Harris during her failed 2019 presidential bid when she tacked to the left in the primary. As the Democratic nominee, she has distanced herself from that position, but is still subject to attacks from the right, including the Trump campaign, for once supporting the idea, like their VP. In recent weeks, Vance has argued for a strikingly different approach to health care coverage, saying the federal government should roll back the regulations of the Affordable Care Act and allow insurers to group the sickest people into separate risk pools, which, if you actually understood insurance, you would know is a disaster in the making. Critics of that plan say it would result in people with pre-existing conditions being forced to pay exorbitant insurance premiums or not being able to find insurance at all. That's the problem with it. Vance's spokesman said the vice presidential nominee now believes Medicare for all to be bad policy. Senator Vance, like President Trump, doesn't want people dying in the streets, but believes the details matter. And the Democrats' top-down Medicare for all plan would make health care worse for Americans. Who cares about what their views are on that? I think we kind of got it all here. Is there anything else interesting? Vance's judgment that Trump had thoroughly failed to deliver on his economic populism came in the context of a discussion of wealthy business executives. Ooh, he loves those. Such as former New York Mayor Mike Bloomberg or former Italian Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi running for office. Vance said he doubted that Trump's richest donors would abandon him in 2020 because he had continued to serve their interests as president, despite his populist rhetoric. Not sure any of these people feel like they need to switch sides, he wrote. Vance gave no hint in the messages of the enthusiasm with which he would soon publicly embrace Trumpism.
Enthusiasms.
Right, that's exactly it. But he did indicate that he was thinking carefully about his future, certainly calculating. In February of 2020, he wrote to his acquaintance that he believed they were both working with the same long-term approach to achieve their political goals. You're playing a strategic game, Vance wrote. Same as me. Okay. Well, that's not so much weird as hypocritical, but, being that hypocritical is kind of weird. How about weird? Well, there's something from USA Today, I guess. I'm reading it to you today anyway. It was published yesterday. J.D. Vance's past remarks on car seats deterring people from having kids has gone viral. I think on the basis of its weirdness. Can anybody out there guess before we read this thing? Without cheating, if you already read it, you're ineligible. I'm going to remove you from the guessing rolls. Why would car seats be preventing people from having children? Is it they're difficult to install and use, let's not have any sex because, or deliberately, attempt to get pregnant, because car seats, they're so hard to use, and it's really not worth the candle, right? Would you like to have sex? Yes, but I'm afraid that in like a year, we're going to have to deal with car seats. So we better just not. Why don't we just watch a movie? Seems plausible in weirdo world. A resurfaced video clip of Republican vice presidential nominee J.D. Vance is once again taking off on the internet as economic issues and family dynamics. As economic issues and family dynamics continue to dominate the election cycle. So, difficult thing to try and make this idea of his commenting on car seats relevant. This particular clip from 2023, so he's already a senator here, is gaining traction because Vance indicates that car seats are preventing people from having more babies. Unless it's, I didn't think about this possibility. Do you want to have sex and or deliberately attempt to, become pregnant? Yes. All right. Would it be fun, you think, to be like when we were teenagers and we'll do it in the back seat of the car? Yeah. All right. But I warn you, I'm so excited about the prospect of having children that even before you became pregnant, I installed a car seat in the back. Or this is our second child or whatever. And I want to have sex with you and have a second child, but the car seat, has foiled our plans for exciting backseat car sex. Take it out. Oh, it's so hard to install. We'll go somewhere else. Well, I don't know. I'm committed to the car idea now. I don't know. I'm not certain. Well, I'm just guessing ahead of time because it's more fun than finding out why he's actually weird is guessing that why he might be even weirder than that. Or trying to find a normal-ish kind of reason for why his stupid remark was made, and then let's just get to the real dumb one. All right. A TikTok of Vance made by user What the Actual Karen, whose bio identifies her as Team Kamala, shows an excerpt of his exchange with Association of Flight Attendants CWA, AFL-CIO president Sarah Nelson, the Flight Attendants Union. President Sarah Nelson at a March 2023 Senate hearing for the Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation. What is going on? Why is he even there? Oh, he's a senator. I forgot. The longer video from the hearing, originally surfaced by Snopes, shows Vance advocating for balancing marginal safety improvements for infants on airplanes with the stressors they might put on kids and parents. Okay, so a flight attendant there, I guess presumably testifying in favor of, hey, we put kids in car seats, in cars. Maybe we should put kids in car seats in airplanes. I don't know. Was that the position? Or that there should be some marginal safety improvements for infants on airplanes as opposed to sit on your parents' lap. I mean, if your airplane crashes, you got bigger problems. It might have been better if they were strapped in, but, most cases everybody's died in this. But I guess turbulence, right? Can you hold a baby on your lap and then there's turbulence and your baby flies up and hits the roof? That's bad. What about strapping them down? Okay. Why am I guessing? Just keep reading. The American families aren't having enough children, or we're already off the rails with Vance, right? What do you think, Senator, about maybe we should have restraints for infants on airlines? Americans aren't having enough children. Oh, where is this going? I think there's evidence that some of the things that we're doing to parents is driving down the number of children that American families are having. Oh, you mean like rising food costs or out of control child care costs or making it impossible to support a family on one income or even two in many cases? No, I mean something else. In particular, there's evidence that the car seat rules that we've imposed, I hate government regulation, the car seat rules that we've imposed, which of course I want kids to drive in car seats, but I'm afraid that they've driven down the number of babies born in this country by over 100,000. I've asked 100,000 couples. That's 200,000 people. I've asked, why aren't you having more babies? And they're constantly telling me car seats is what's doing it. So as we think about how to make kids safe here, I think we should do it in a way that's accommodating of American families. All right. Vance's campaign did not immediately respond to USA Today's request for comment on the story. Here's the video, I guess, is embedded in here. Vance's remarks on car seats are the latest incident of his previous words being resurfaced as political fodder. There was the childless cat ladies thing earlier on. The TikTok of the transportation hearing was widely shared on Twitter. Never mind the history. Often with laughing faces or eye-rolling emojis, several people argue that the economy, not car seats, is deterring people from having kids. Certainly more so than car seats, I think. Yes, J.D. Vance, it's the car seat laws that are keeping people from having kids nowadays. Not the astounding daycare or groceries costs. Not the fact that both parents have to work multiple jobs to make ends meet or have other goals in mind. It's the car seat laws. Said one user in apparent sarcasm. The economy has been a major issue in the election. They helpfully tell us both presidential candidates make the case to voters that they will better support Americans in the years who face years-long inflation and rising cost of living. Trump's economic agenda includes universal tariffs somehow, expanding the 2017 tax credits and cracking down on illegal immigration. Vice President Kamala Harris's plan includes tackling the housing crisis, reducing the cost of childcare, and banning price gouging on food and groceries. Presented as though, they were both actual answers to the problem. I mean, Kamala Harris, what are you going to do about rising grocery prices? We're going to implement some plans I have for controlling those costs. What about childcare? Same thing. I mean, what about the specifics? Okay, we can get into that. What about you, Donald Trump? We're going to do something great like no one has ever seen before. Tariffs on China. China will be paying for your babysitters and daycare and the problem they have with the car seats. We're going to make Mexico pay for it or something. I don't know. Anyway, they both have equivalent plans. So that's the latest, just so you're up to speed. I guess if you're making your way around social media this weekend and people start saying, yeah, car seats are the issue. I can't have a baby because car seats. Now you'll know what that's all about. It doesn't even really sound like he necessarily blames it on car seats, but he's just basically sitting there saying, I'm an anti-regulatory freak because I'm a libertarian weirdo, and something, we should be having more babies. People aren't doing it because they're being regulated out of it. I doubt it. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I feel like we should be turning back to stories we've held back on or didn't finish earlier in the week. It might be time to go back and do that. Though as I was doing so, I guess I was reviewing other things that were flashing before my eyes, trying to see what else we might want to mention about that. But I guess I'll mention this. I didn't put the story aside because I'm still just not that interested in the Eric Adams story, not because I'm trying to protect the reputation of Democrats. But the Democrats I know have been dumping on Eric Adams from day one and consider him to be barely, I guess to the extent that there's still such a thing as dinos, Democrats in name only, everybody basically says, we consider Eric Adams to be a Democrat of convenience. He thought he could win the mayoralty as a Democrat, and that's usually the case in New York City. So he became one, but he's been apparently just been a dirty cop the whole time. So he's just carried that over into the mayor's office as well. What has struck me so far has been the almost tragicomic nature of his attempts to avoid comeuppance for all of this. I mean, at bottom, this all appears to be that he was taking payments from the Turkish government or people closely related to the Turkish government. It's hard to tell these days, like Russia, sometimes who is and who's not in the government. But I guess it's probably difficult to tell here, too. Like, is Peter Thiel in government? No, but is he kind of running the government? He's trying. So, there are definitely line blurring exercises going on all over the place. But what struck me was apparently when they would bring people, and the FBI would bring Adams and other aides in for questioning. And, what was happening was, in one case, an Adams aide is questioned about, I guess, messages on her, I think it was a woman, on her, I don't know, her phone, text messages, or, maybe using WhatsApp or something like that, and questionable communications that the FBI wanted to ask her about. And she says, okay, sure, but I have to go to the bathroom. All right, fine, go to the bathroom. They let her go to the bathroom, and she goes to the bathroom and she deletes the messages and then deletes the messaging app. And then comes back. And the FBI basically, the upshot of it is they were like, so we wanted to question you about these apps. Can we see your phone? Here you go. Oh, hey, the apps and the phone or the app and the messages are missing. But the thing is, you just deleted them. We know that you did this. We know that you have these. I mean, you're here on probable cause, which means basically we've seen these messages. Why did we think to ask you about them? Because we know that you sent them. We've seen the messages. Now that they're deleted, now you're going to be charged with obstruction of justice as well. But Eric Adams himself does the same thing. He's questioned, and we got to look at your phone. Oh, I don't know the password to my phone. I just changed it, and I don't remember it anymore, so I can't open it for you. Well, first of all, the FBI, we have people here in Washington who can identify you mooners and open your phones. And also probably, again, you're here on probable cause. It's pretty likely that they're actually monitoring your phone, so they know you changed your password, and they know what the password is, and they know when you changed it, and now they know why you changed it as well, and it's just inept. But, so now you're going to face obstruction of justice charges on top of all of the other things. It's comically absurd, but I got to find, I don't know that I have the latest Adams articles on hand. I read them, but I don't know. I was struck by that part. I thought that was kind of funny. So anyway, you'll probably be hearing about that over the weekend as well. But other things that I wanted to change direction and go into, there are many. Shall we finish the reading of Lawfare's What Happened to the Biden Impeachment? This was Quinta Jurecic and Molly Reynolds writing on the 24th. That Republican efforts to impeach Biden appear to have fallen apart, but that the attempt sheds light on the current and future politics of impeachment. There's the tit-for-tat issue when Democrats were floating the ideas of impeachment for George W. Bush or Dick Cheney, etc., way back when. Oh, no, you can't have that. This is just tit-for-tat for the Clinton impeachment, which was tit-for-tat for the, I guess, Nixon impeachments, but that tit for tat when Republicans do it, that's cool. And in fact, they're doing it now, and it's fine. Except it's nice for Quinta Jurecic and Molly Reynolds to point out that it's actually quite dumb and damaging and sets a precedent, a low bar, so that you can expect to see Republicans continue to impeach people for very poorly substantiated reasons. And of course, again, the Biden impeachment in particular was like, well, he did stuff that's bad. I don't know, treason, because he did a policy that I disagree with. So we're going to impeach him. I think that was the sort of the setup of it. And is this divided into sections? It's not. So where did we get to? The impeachment report issued by the several House committees that looked into such things, these accusations, basically came out and said, we haven't got anything. But some very bad things have happened. There was the core allegation at the heart of both the investigation into Russian election interference in 2016 and the first impeachment. This is by comparison to the impeachments of Donald Trump, right? They were pointing out, well, those investigations and impeachment, Trump was allowing himself to be influenced by and improperly exerting influence over foreign governments. The Biden impeachment report flips this around to accuse the president's family of influence peddling that involved entities and individuals from some of America's greatest adversaries. Remember this? China and Russia, for example. At one point, the report charges the Biden family with somehow selling political influence abroad, stating that the Bidens did not have a golf course real property, a clothing line, or media business, all businesses that Trump and his family have explored at one time or another. I don't really even know what the point of saying that they didn't have that was, because it only highlights the fact that Trump did, and it was wrong of him to do so. But among the articles of impeachment against Trump during the Ukraine scandal, the first one, was that the allegation that Trump obstructed Congress by refusing to comply with House subpoenas. Also, by the way, obstructed justice by not fulfilling the requirements of law that the Congress had considered in terms of aid that it was giving to Ukraine, but he didn't like it, so he wasn't going to do it. Right. So there's that. The report accuses the Biden administration of obstructing the committee's impeachment inquiry by withholding key documents and witnesses. Just trying to flip the script and say, well, sure, Trump didn't comply with subpoenas, but neither did Biden, except there was just nothing behind these subpoenas. And the information they wanted was really about other people's actions. The Mueller report, the findings of the first impeachment and the House January 6th committee all focused on Trump's penchant for using government power, particularly the Justice Department, as a weapon against his enemies. Likewise, House Republicans claim, with little evidence this time, that Biden somehow interfered with the Justice Department's handling of the criminal investigation and prosecution of Hunter Biden on tax and gun charges. Really not even equivalent charges, and of course, with very flimsy, if any, evidence at all of any involvement by Joe Biden versus taped phone calls from Donald Trump. Listen, I need you to do us a favor. The report even contains an implicit rebuttal to Trump's prosecution in Florida over classified information held at Mar-a-Lago. Somewhat awkwardly, the document shoehorns in a section on Special Counsel Robert Hur's investigation of Biden's own mishandling of classified information, although that probe, which concluded without criminal charges, was entirely independent of the House committee's work. Why is it even in there? For one thing, not to mention the fact that, they're still set to prosecute Trump over his mishandling of documents and just aren't going to do it with Biden. The main relevance of this portion of the report seems to be that it provided the House with a basis on which to send a number of informational requests and subpoenas to the executive branch. And when the administration refused to comply with it, it allowed House Republicans to trumpet that Biden had obstructed their investigation. Chief among these examples of noncompliance is the Justice Department's refusal to respond to a February subpoena demanding, among other things, audio recordings related to the Hur investigation. In July of 2024, the month before the report was released, the Judiciary Committee sued Attorney General Merrick Garland to enforce the subpoena, relying in part on the existence of the impeachment inquiry in arguing for why the court should force Garland to comply. In other words, they heard when Democrats had launched an impeachment inquiry and got courts to buy the idea that subpoenas related to that impeachment inquiry ought to be given greater weight and force because they happened in the context of an impeachment inquiry. They said, oh, well, if we launch something and call it an impeachment inquiry, then all of our requests to information, whether they're relevant to the impeachment inquiry or not, will be given extra weight. So that's what they did. Except it doesn't work that way. Or, as we heard from the movies, where all truth comes from.
That is not how this works!
Right, exactly. Thank you for chiming in. But try to calm down. Now, for those who closely watched the oversight battles of the Trump era, there's an echo here of the House's series of lawsuits seeking the testimony of Trump's one-time White House counsel, Don McGahn, which left the state of law on congressional subpoena enforcement unsettled. While these comparisons to past Trump scandals are largely left implicit, occasionally the report spells out things directly. It's studded with references to Trump's previous impeachments, which it points to in justifying its own expansive view of Biden's apparently impeachable conduct, although it promises that, quote, despite the cheapening of the impeachment power by Democrats in recent years, the House's decision to pursue articles of impeachment must not be made lightly, unless we make them lightly. Among other things, the committee points to the two Trump impeachments to argue that an impeachable offense need not rise to the level of criminality, and that the House may properly conclude that a president's obstruction of Congress is relevant to assessing the evidentiary record in an impeachment inquiry, allowing the chamber to draw a negative inference from the White House's refusal to provide information. The tit-for-tat nature, of the House GOP's report's relationship with the Trump impeachments raises the question of whether American politics has begun a process of downgrading impeachment from a serious response to presidential wrongdoing to yet another mechanism for litigating partisan spats. The apparent willingness of the House Republicans to drop the impeachment matter entirely when pursuing it no longer paid major political dividends certainly suggests such a downgrade. Presciently, during the 2019 impeachment process, Mike Johnson himself, not yet in a major leadership role in the Republican conference, warned that Democrats were opening a Pandora's box and that a future Republican House would likely demand that any Democratic president be impeached. And lo and behold, he fulfilled his own prophecy. Writing in Lawfare in 2022, Brian Kalt described a, quote, age of futile impeachments, in which the House barrels forward with impeachments regardless of the odds for a Senate conviction. Kalt argued that while impeachment is still important when conviction is achievable, in situations where it's not many, which will be many, rather, Kalt argued, while impeachment is still important when conviction is achievable, in situations where it's not, which will be many, given our heightened partisan moment, censure is the more appropriate approach. House Republicans clearly didn't heed this call, but you keep finding do you remember the answer that some fellow Democrats gave when people said, well, what about impeaching Bush for this torture stuff, for indefinite detention, these ideas of warrantless wiretapping, etc.? What about that? Well, the answer was always, we don't have the votes. We do have the votes to impeach him, but we don't have the votes to convict. We don't have the votes. We don't have the votes. We don't have the votes. That constrains Democrats. We didn't have the votes, as it turns out, to impeach Donald Trump. But I guess it finally got to the point where they were saying, well, if we don't have the votes, is always going to be the excuse, then presidents will just do anything. I mean, we should see if we have the votes, because we might get some of their votes. And indeed they did. But no such constraints with Republicans, I guess. How does the Biden impeachment report fit into this story? On the one hand, the House Republicans did push forward with an apparently retaliatory investigation that seems to have borne little fruit. On the other hand, though, the House seems to have lost its interest in actually bothering to impeach the president over it. Viewed optimistically, perhaps the Biden episode demonstrates that it's more difficult to muscle through a purely partisan impeachment in the absence of any actual facts. But more difficult doesn't mean impossible. Biden was, of course, not the only high-ranking executive branch official into whom House Republicans opened an impeachment inquiry. Following an earlier rank-and-file effort led by murdery traitor Green of Georgia, the House Homeland Security Committee sent articles of impeachment against Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas to the full House in February of 2024. The first vote of the articles failed, but a second, held when attendance numbers were more favorable for Republicans, passed, sending them to the Senate. Now, in April, the Senate dispensed with the articles via a series of procedural votes rather than holding a full trial, as is their right, as we explained. But yes, this was a fulfillment of a years-long campaign by Republicans to do things like that. They basically say, there's more immigrants in this country than I want. Homeland Security is responsible for immigration enforcement. So we should impeach any Democratic Homeland Security Secretary because treason, or because, I don't know, I want less immigrants and he's not enforcing, or people are breaking the law and getting into this country and he's a law enforcement guy and they should enforce something, and so therefore we should impeach him. It was always garbage and a joke, but this time they indulged it. The Senate didn't, but the House did. Mayorkas, of course, not ultimately removed from office, and the House Republican Conference, with its very small majority, was sufficiently divided on the issue that adopting the articles of impeachment took 2 tries. But the fact that Mayorkas was successfully impeached, while it appears Biden will not be, illustrates another dynamic of contemporary impeachment politics. Even facing an identical partisan balance of power, not all futile impeachments are created equal. This particular retaliatory impeachment effort against Biden did not succeed, but that doesn't guarantee that future efforts won't. In 1970, then Representative Gerald Ford of Michigan famously quipped, "I will be eaten by wolves." He did not actually say that, but he did famously quip. You think it was a quip? An impeachable offense is whatever a majority of the House of Representatives considers it to be at a given moment in history. I didn't realize it was meant to be a quip. Getting to such a majority wasn't easy in the Mayorkas case and has proved yet impossible in the Biden one, but the ability to tie an impeachment vote to a specific, highly salient political issue, in this case immigration, likely helped sell House Republicans on the idea of voting to impeach Mayorkas, a tactic that could prove fruitful later down the line. The sprawling nature of the accusation against Biden, which also heavily involved alleged misconduct by relatives rather than by the president himself, lacked the same clear political hook. When Biden dropped out of the presidential race, the political salience of an impeachment targeted at his family plummeted immediately. With that in mind, it's not surprising that House Republicans have apparently decided to move on. It's impossible to know if House Republicans ever believed that they could succeed in adopting articles of impeachment against President Biden in the House. Perhaps that choice to pursue the inquiry in the first place was more about managing demands from various elements of the conference than it was about a belief that impeachment articles would ever be sent over to the Senate. I guess I would add here, in case they haven't considered this, there were probably members of the House conference who knew exactly what would happen but also chose to blame it on Democrats, and said, well, we're facing this overwhelming pressure from members of the House Republican Conference, wackadoodles like Murdery Trader Green. Okay, we got to placate these people. Fine. Here are the articles of impeachment. And yes, I know we don't have the votes, but that's also part of the point. I'm willing to say, well, here's what we'll do. We'll impeach the president, we'll send it to the Senate, and we'll say, now you got to have a trial. And if they do like they did with Mayorkas and just said, no, these charges are ridiculous, we dismiss them outright, then we'll say, look at this partisan outrageousness. We sent articles of impeachment against the President of the United States, one of the most solemn duties you could ever charge the Senate with, trying an impeachment of the President of the United States. And they refused to do it because they're partisan. They wanted to protect Biden. That's their reasoning. And all I want is the argument. There was no reason, really, I don't even believe, a reason to impeach Biden. I just want to make the other guys deny it. Make the other son of a bitch deny it, right? That was the play for some of them. It doesn't seem to get a mention here, but it's a little weedy and difficult to explain sometimes. Though it seems like you get it, I think. I don't know. You're not here to complain that you don't get it anyway. But while the efforts to impeach Biden appear to have been futile, it does not mean it will be without consequence. Consider the Judiciary Committee's lawsuit seeking to enforce its subpoena against Garland to obtain the Her materials, which remains ongoing. The case could potentially shape future oversight efforts. The Justice Department, in responding to the suit, has argued not only that the audio recordings in questions are protected by executive privilege, but also that federal courts lack jurisdiction to hear the case, and that House committees do not have a cause of action to sue to enforce compliance with subpoenas. I don't love that position, but it is the maximalist position that the executive branch tends to take. And you can bet your ass that Donald Trump will absolutely make the same argument. Litigation in recent years has left the jurisprudence in this area murky, perhaps illustrated best by the path of the McGahn case, which traversed a bewildering path back and forth between the trial and appellate courts, which I predict is the same path that presidential immunity is going to be on, going back and forth, ping-ponging back and forth between Tanya Chutkin and the Supreme Court somehow. The case ultimately resolved with one ruling by the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit establishing that the House had standing to bring and the court had jurisdiction to decide this case, along with a second pending D.C. Circuit ruling on whether the House had a cause of action, which was left unresolved when the House and the Justice Department reached an agreement in 2021 for McGahn to testify. As the McGahn saga suggests, in recent years, Congress has struggled to obtain information from a Justice Department that has become increasingly willing to make aggressive arguments that functionally lock the legislature out of the courts when it comes to enforcing subpoenas. Though the political valence has flipped from the McGahn case, when a Democratic House sought information from a Republican administration, the same general dynamic is at work here, with the Justice Department arguing that the House's subpoenas are not judicially enforceable. If the House pushes forward with the case, it could offer the courts new opportunities to make law on some of these questions. It also is certainly possible that the Her tapes case will be resolved without making substantial amounts of new law related to civil enforcement of congressional subpoenas. Indeed, the Justice Department has often seemingly preferred to settle cases rather than allow courts to create precedent in this area. But the litigation illustrates how the consequences of an impeachment inquiry can reach beyond the simple success or failure of a vote on the articles themselves. Despite that apparent lack of success, the House GOP's Biden report might end up setting political precedent as well. There is no serious substantive comparison to be drawn between the Trump impeachments, which responded to serious abuses of power, and the largely manufactured concerns raised in the impeachment report against Biden. That hampered the GOP's ability to turn the impeachment investigation into a full-blown impeachment, but it may not stop future retaliatory efforts that are going to gain more political traction, that are able to gain more political traction. Perhaps in addition to or instead of futile impeachments, Congress watchers might expect to see more futile impeachment investigations, that is, impeachment probes that are conducted without ever actually resulting in an impeachment, even without any expectation of heading to an impeachment vote at all. Even if such performances achieve little in the way of fact-gathering or political advantage, partisans, particularly on the Republican side of the aisle, may come to expect them. I mean, if Murdery Trader Green can effectively get an impeachment inquiry launched, passed, brought to articles, passed on the floor, and sent to the Senate, then any wackadoodle should be able to expect that as well, and they'll just have to pick a target and see if they can't make a name for themselves in doing it. All right. Well, that is important, and I'm glad we got through that one. Well, there are a couple of other long-ish reads that should be on the record. It's a shift in gears because of the nature of the story at its heart. But let's see. I've got 2 different choices to go with. Well, as the next break is coming up, we'll choose what may be the shorter of the two and something that should be on your radar. Jared Kushner, back in the news, as it turns out. This time in his effort to continue to enrich himself with gifts from the Gulf states through his so-called private equity fund. Kushner's fund has reaped millions in fees, but so far returned no profits, reports the New York Times. The son-in-law of former President Donald J. Trump has said he has intentionally moved slowly to invest investors' money, which came primarily from foreign entities. There's a lot wrapped up in this, of course. One thing I always found interesting about his venture capital or private equity fund, I don't know which one he labels it, was that like 99% of the money was raised from foreign sources, if not necessarily foreign governments. But I just found that interesting. I mean, I can see why he would be able to do that. What's interesting is that he's not able to do anything else. That having been a top advisor to the most recent former president of the United States of America, he can find virtually no sources of domestic capital interested in investing with him. I find that fascinating, that you should have the biggest Rolodex in the world coming out of that role, especially among Americans, and yet no one in America trusts Jared Kushner with their money. And I don't think anybody in the foreign governments trusts Jared Kushner with their money either. That's just a lost leader to them. We're going to give money to Jared Kushner and lose it. But we'll make much, much more money back later if Trump were to be elected or somehow force his way back into control of the United States. That would pay off tremendously. We don't care about losing this $2 billion because we're going to make $10 billion if things work out. And of course, Jared Kushner, in the meantime, has the protection of, business law here in the United States. Yes, you invested $2 billion with me. Yes, I have given you zero returns on your investment. But hey, that's the nature of investing. Sometimes it's kind of risky. What can you do? Well, it's one thing if you give him money to invest and he invests in it and the stuff just doesn't work out. We didn't make any money. That's business practice law. But if we give you money to invest and you don't invest it and it disappears, well, then why did you're supposed to take a risk with something. Oh, yeah, I risked it, all right. I hired a bunch of people to find out where I should risk your money, and they said nowhere. That was the risk that we ran. It might turn out that we might not invest your money. That doesn't work like that. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, I'm a little bit late in coming back to the show. I'm just having another show going on in the background here at KITM World Headquarters. But time to launch into today's episode of What the F is Wrong with Jared Kushner. And there's so much. We'll begin with what Eric Lipton tells us on September 25th. The private equity firm run by Jared Kushner, you know who he is, has been paid at least $112 million in fees since 2021. That's the private equity world for you. $112 million in fees since 2021 by, it says here Saudi Arabia, but what that means is the Saud family. The name Saudi Arabia comes from the Saud family. The Saud family owns this portion of Arabia. I'm just reminding everybody of our stance on the show. The Saud family owns all this land. We have to explain to the rest of the world what the F is going on in this land. Why? Who's the government responsible for this? Oh, well, I guess we are. We own it. What's the name of your country then, right? We're dealing with country. What are you talking about? This is a compound. I own all this. But I mean, you want to be in the United Nations. We want to establish diplomatic relations with the people who occupy this vast area. Well, it's the Arabian Peninsula. Okay, but what's the name of your country? Saudi Arabia. Okay. I mean, that sounds a little bit weird, though. Possessive? Are you sure that you want that? Saudish? Saudi Arabia. All right. Fine. That's the name of your country. Like if this was, Trump's America, Donald Trump presents America. If that was now the name of the country, he'd be in a similar situation. But he doesn't own all of the property in this country, or really any of it. But, you know how I feel about this. Well, at any rate, it doesn't matter. He's been paid, Jared Kushner has $112 million in fees since 2021 by the Saud family and other foreign investors, even though as of July, and that was recent, July, it had not yet returned any profits to the governments largely bankrolling the firm. Now, ordinarily, like you and I would say, I've paid you $112 million in fees for the purpose of you taking my money, investing it, making money with it, and then giving me that extra money. Why haven't you given me anything? And, if the excuse was we've just lost in the stock market, that's bad, but, there's not that much you can do about that. But if the excuse is I haven't done anything with your money, then you might say, what are you taking $112 million in fees for? And as it turns out, the answer is I have hired a lot of people to not do anything with your money, and we are all already wealthy and are used to having a lot of money, so we have taken your money. Well, again, as an ordinary investor, you would say, this is outrageous. I paid you for the purpose of making me more money. But in the case of the Saud family and the other Middle Eastern royal families who own their portion of the land that they live on, that they call the country, have understood this from the beginning. We are bribing Jared Kushner as a method of bribing Donald Trump. We think he'll be the president of the United States. It is great for us when our family is recognized as a country and gets to have deals with the United States, and we are able to buy our private security forces F-16s, and we want this to continue. So it doesn't matter at all to us whether we make money. We have a sovereign wealth fund that has several more $1 billion in it. In fact, tens of several billions of dollars more in it. And we invest those in places where we think we'll make money. And we can afford to throw $2 million away with Jared Kushner in the hopes that we'll get $10 or $20 billion worth of, planes or various other investment opportunities later on. So the facts that $112 million in fees have been subtracted from the $2 billion they gave to Kushner, even though Kushner hasn't invested their money, are the findings of a Senate Finance Committee inquiry into the operations of Affinity Partners, the Miami-based firm Mr. Kushner set up. The committee opened an investigation this spring in response to reporting in the New York Times, which is now reporting this, examining the firm's first 3 years of work. Senator Ron Wyden, Democrat of Oregon, the committee's chairman, said the new information had only deepened his concerns that Mr. Kushner's firm creates conflicts of interest, particularly with his father-in-law running for election. That, of course, was the point of establishing the firm, at least for Donald Trump saying it's okay to go ahead and do it. Jared Kushner's purpose in establishing the firm, holding out the promise of being able to influence a future Donald Trump administration in exchange for letting Jared Kushner keep large chunks of this supposed investment. Why don't we call it an investment? I'll keep 10% of it, and you'll lose the rest, possibly. But in other words, how much would it be worth to you to be able to bribe Donald Trump's administration and own it if it were to succeed in returning to power? Would $2 billion be, okay with you? Yes? All right. Well, then let's do that. Mr. Wyden asked why Affinity Partners had not, quote, distributed a penny of earnings back to its clients, and suggested that perhaps it was set up primarily as a way for foreign entities to pay the Kushners rather than a typical fund in which partners reap returns for capital that's deployed. Affinity's investors may not be motivated by commercial considerations, but rather the opportunity to funnel foreign government money to members of President Trump's family, namely Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump, Mr. Wyden wrote in a letter to Affinity last week, asking 24 questions. Mr. Kushner, in interviews with the Times, acknowledged that his firm had moved slowly at first to invest the $3 billion, now I thought it's up from $2 $3 billion it had collected from its investors since it formed in 2021. He said that was in part because a flood of venture capital moving into markets made it difficult initially to find attractive deals. That meant a delay in generating profits to return money to his investors. It's a good excuse. I mean, this is really slow, but it's, on the surface, it's a decent excuse. We've been trying to be really careful with our investors' money. In a statement, Affinity called the response from Mr. Wyden a political move. The firm said that it had followed all federal laws and ethics rules and added that a delay by a private equity firm in returning profits to investors was not unusual. And that's what makes it a good excuse. It probably isn't all that unusual. I don't know. But I don't know about 3 years. But, again, you could blame it on losing in the market, but you haven't even tried to get into the market. So you can't really blame it on that. Well, we're being careful with our investors' money. Well, okay. I mean, business law in America gives you that cover. I would call attention to this. Like, the firm says it followed all federal laws and ethics rules, so there's nothing there. And we're just being careful and deliberate. So there's nothing there either. I would then say, do I have this right? Jared Kushner is the head of your firm? Yeah. And yet you say you followed all federal laws and ethics rules. Is that correct? Well, we do say that, yes. And we mean it too. All right. Can I just out of curiosity, does anybody remember, who was the most flagrant ignorer of federal laws and ethics rules in the Trump White House besides Trump himself? And the answer there, I think, is Jared Kushner, who had to, revise his financial disclosure forms, his required by federal law and subject to ethics rules, 10 times. Oh, I keep forgetting. Oh, you caught me on that one. I forgot that $1 billion investment. Oh, you got me again. I forgot another $1 billion. I keep forgetting where I put my billions of dollars. I keep forgetting this investment, this asset, that asset. Why don't you give me more time to revise my financial disclosure forms? And by the way, I can't pass my security clearance test. I need a, hey, Pops. I don't know what he calls his father-in-law. Probably Mr. Trump or President Trump. Can you waive all the requirements and get me the security clearance I need to be able to have secret meetings with, let's say, the sovereign of Saudi Arabia for reasons? Oh, Middle East peace. I got to get Middle East peace. Sure, we can do that. All right. All right. Well, they go on to say, by the way, it's not unusual that a private equity firm would be late in returning profits. Partisan politics aside, Affinity Partners is an SEC-registered investment firm that has always acted appropriately, and any suggestion to the contrary is false. Chad Mizell, who I immediately suspect for being named Chad, he's Affinity Partners' chief legal officer. And this is what he has said. We are fortunate to have the support of some of the world's most sophisticated investors and work hard on their behalf every day. Not just flattery, calling them the most sophisticated investors, not necessarily true, but the point of it is not that he's flattering them or that he really believes, that they are sophisticated. The reason he says it is because, again, American business law says, and SEC regulations say, that if you are dealing with, and especially if you're dealing exclusively with, quote unquote, the law actually says sophisticated investors. What does it mean? Nobody knows. There's litigation about it all the time. But if you're dealing with sophisticated investors versus retail investors, average Americans who are investing through their, E-Trade or Charles Schwab account or whatever, the rules are different. You can get away with more. You can set different terms for return on investment and different amounts and different reporting requirements. All sorts of things are different when you're dealing with sophisticated investors. The SEC says they can take care of themselves. They don't need as much regulatory protection as retail investors do. And so it's important that, Chad learned this. You gotta say every chance that you get that our investors are sophisticated investors. And it's hard to imagine that the Saudi royal family aren't sophisticated investors. Except when they do things like, hey, our advisors say, don't you dare give $2 billion of sovereign wealth fund monies to Jared Kushner. He doesn't know anything about investing. He loses money all the time. The reason he's looking for this money right now is that he's sunk $1 billion of his family's money into this stupid investment in a skyscraper in Manhattan and can't afford it. Don't give him money. He doesn't know what he's up to. He doesn't know what he's doing. And, Saudi Arabia, like us, has its own. They set up a whole set of laws and everything to make it look more like they were a country. And one of the rules is the royal family can overrule you on stuff like this. So they did. Because again, we're not looking to make money. You investigated whether or not it was smart to invest with Jared Kushner. I'm trying to bribe Jared Kushner. So let's pay the money. Will I lose it? Yes, it's a bribe. Pay. So they did. Which, if it came up in court, I don't know how admissible it would be. Under the circumstances, I suppose they could litigate that forever. But if it was admitted as evidence, then you would say, are these sophisticated investors or not? And by the way, this gives you an idea of how nebulous the term is. On the one hand, you would say, no, nobody who would say, yes, give $2 billion to Jared Kushner after being advised that he was an idiot could possibly be considered a sophisticated investor. On the other hand, as you can see, he has a suit and a Rolls Royce and lots of money. And some might even say that it was the height of sophistication to recognize and acknowledge the difference between true investment and bribery and simply say it's strategic. The investment is in the bribe. Give him $2 billion in bribe money and we'll make $10 billion in crooked fashion later on. That's an $8 billion return. Sophisticated investment. Well, because we don't know what the F we're doing in this country with our business laws, or we do know exactly what we're doing, and it's allowing rich people to siphon off more money every day, you have us over a barrel there. As the Times has previously reported, to return to the article, at least 99% of the roughly $3 billion invested with Kushner came from overseas sources, including $2 billion from the Saudi government's Public Investment Fund, which, again, to leave the job of top advisor, senior advisor to the President of the United States, and not be able to raise a penny of money domestically is really concerning. But, whatever. Moving along. Most of the rest of the money comes from the sovereign wealth funds of Qatar and the United Arab Emirates, as well as a chunk from Terry Gou, G-O-U, the Taiwanese billionaire and founder of Foxconn, the world's largest electronic contract manufacturer. And remember, Foxconn is famous, among other things, for being one of the outfits that announced that they were going to build a gigantic factory, giving Donald Trump the chance to have a press conference saying, Foxconn is the greatest in the whole world, and they're building a gigantic factory, and we're going to be creating billions of jobs here in the United States. Of course, later on saying all of the jobs that were created went to illegal immigrants anyway. But that's not Foxconn's fault, because Foxconn never built the thing that they said they were going to build, that Donald Trump said that he had brought to the United States, which he didn't, and which ended up not creating the jobs that he said he had delivered on as promised. But, another lost leader. Foxconn will get another shot at doing whatever it is they think they want to do later on, because they gave this money to Trump and Kushner. It'll work out just fine. So where is he raising his money? Saudi Arabia, Qatar, United Arab Emirates. There's a very concentrated group. They're all in one place, and one flight gets to cover them all. Plus some of it came from, I guess, this Taiwanese guy. But there is a fifth mystery foreign investor that Affinity has declined to identify, which is amazing considering the situation. Where's your money coming from? Well, it's all clearly bribes. Coming from the Saud family. And then, interestingly, I also raised the rest of it from royal families in absolute monarchies, except for this stuff, which comes from a Taiwanese billionaire. And a fifth mystery guy, but I won't tell you about them because he's too unseemly. Okay. Is he Vladimir Putin? No comment. Okay. Let's go with that. Data assembled by PitchBook, a private equity industry research firm, found that profit distributions are most common during a fund's 6th and 7th years. And Affinity has not reached this point. Okay, that is an interesting data point to have. So maybe it's not that unusual that they haven't returned any proceeds from investments. But PitchBook also found that most private equity firms started to pay at least some profits within 2.5 years. So again, profit distributions are most common during the 6th and 7th years, but the majority, I guess, of private equity firms will give you something after 2.5, and it's been 3. And it should probably also be pointed out that most of the 3 years, there haven't even been any investments, so not much chance that there's going to be any profits. Private equity firms like Affinity raise money from investors and then reinvest that capital into small, often not yet public companies that they believe have a good chance to grow quickly or be run more efficiently. The hope is that those bets will generate enough return to eventually pay back the original investors with profits, and often profits that far exceed the management fees. That's the idea. As of the end of 2023, halfway through the 5-year investment commitment that Saudi Arabia and other foreign governments made to Mr. Kushner, the firm had invested about $535 million of the $3 billion that they were given, with that total rising to about $1.1 billion as of July, according to the committee, citing information provided by Affinity. So, as of 2 months ago, they finally kicked it into high gear. They doubled the amount of money that they had invested and brought the total up to about 1/3 of the money that they were given. 2/3 of the money that were given is, I don't know, is it in a savings account? Where is it? I'm not certain where it is. By the way, just to roll things back a little bit, we ran right past it. As of the end of 2023, halfway through the 5-year investment commitment that they gave. Okay, sounds all right. But I remind you of the paragraph or two prior. Profit distributions are most common during a fund's 6th and 7th years. How many years do you want to be in for? Do you want to get in for 10 years with the very common occurrence that we'll start doing our biggest profit distributions in year 6 and 7? We are actually interested in cutting things off at year 5, Jared. Or at least having the option to cut it off at year 5. Which, again, most will pay something 2.5 years in, but they haven't. But we're reserving the right to cut things off at 5 years, whether that's in case you don't generate any profits or whether it's, we're not actually interested in the big profit distribution that most firms see in the years 6 and 7. We wanted to cut it off right before then, just to make sure that you understand that this is a bribe for you to keep and not something you're really supposed to invest. Saudi Arabia pays Affinity an annual fee of 1.25% of its investment, while 3 other known investors pay between 1.25 and 2% in fees, though Affinity Partners would not disclose exactly how much. This led the committee staff to estimate that through the end of 2024, a total of $157 million in fees will have been paid to Affinity Partners, with $87 million of that from Saudi Arabia and the Saud family alone. If the total amount is calculated just for 3 years, Based on 1.25% fee minimum for all investors, that would mean at least $112.5 million in total fees through July and at least $75 million from Saudi Arabia. The fixed 2% management fee imposed annually from the start of a private equity firm as it is evaluating the market and making its investment is relatively common in the industry. Affinity, which as of earlier this year had 33 employees, also expects to get a small cut of profits made on its investments if they are successful. Mr. Kushner, who is the sole owner, has not disclosed how much he is being paid directly. But you see, he did offer them a good deal, right? And he does remark was it Eric Lipton writing this? He does remark that at some point at the initiation of this thing, the Saud family's financial advisors say, no, he doesn't know anything. Don't invest with him. And he may have come back and said, well, if you were to invest with a normal, established, private equity fund with a good reputation, you'd be expected to pay 2% in fees plus a portion of the profits. I'll do it for less because I don't know what I'm doing. I'll do it for 1.25% and a cut of the profits. So, is that a sophisticated investment? He's doing it for half price. On the one hand, he's an idiot who knows nothing. Unsophisticated investment. On the other hand, he'll do it for half the price. Sophisticated investment. Now, what if I come along and say, 7-minute abs? Give me the $3 billion and I'll do it for 0.5% commission. Huge savings, but also makes me a millionaire. And I know maybe not that much less than Jared Kushner about investing in things. Oh, well, let's buy McDonald's stock. I don't know. Whatever. Golly, we made a bad bet and we lost. But, I made $1 million. But that would all be protected under business law and make them look sophisticated somehow. To date, Affinity has invested in a variety of companies, including Shlomo Group. Where do you think they found those guys? An Israeli car leasing and financing company. Dubizzle Group. Where's Dubizzle from? Dubai, of course, a Dubai-related online real estate site. Which, they're looking far and wide. I collected money from Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Qatar. Where'd you invest? Dubai. Well, and Israel. But I think you probably should have seen that coming. There's also an investment in EGYM. That's, I think, probably supposed to be said EGYM out loud. It is a Munich-based, that's Germany, so that's different, Munich-based electronic fitness company, which is why I think it's eGym. Also in Mosaic, a California-based solar lending site. Okay. And Zamp, an Abu Dhabi-backed fast food company that operates more than 1,000 restaurants in Brazil. I mean, that's far-flung, Brazil, but it's an Abu Dhabi-backed thing. So again, I've invested in Abu Dhabi, Dubai, and Israel, plus some extra money tossed around in Munich and California. And I guess maybe you could say restaurants in Brazil. The pace of new investments has accelerated considerably this year, now that they're under investigation, I guess, including, you'll never guess, an Israeli financial services firm called Phoenix Holdings Limited and QXO, a building products company based in Connecticut. We'll send Greg over to take a look at that one. The 5-year deal with Affinity's backers gives the firm until August of 2026 to find companies it wants to invest in, which would be nearly halfway through Mr. Trump's second term if he wins in November or seizes power. That would create an obvious conflict of interest, Mr. Wyden wrote in his letter, as Saudi Arabia and the other foreign partners could attempt to pressure the Trump family as they weigh whether to pull their money out or renegotiate the terms of the deal. A potential future Trump administration will have financial motives to make foreign policy decisions that may be counter to the national interest, our national interest, in order to ensure Kushner and Ivanka Trump continue to collect millions of dollars in fees from foreign governments through Affinity, Mr. Wyden wrote. Sort of the kind of thing that, remember we were just reading about the Republicans' failed attempt to impeach Biden, and they were impeaching him because they said your son is taking in money that's really meant to bribe you into taking foreign policy positions that are counter to the national interest. Every Republican accusation is a what? A confession. This will be our plan when we get a chance to seize power later. A spokesman for Affinity disputed this, suggesting that the firm's investors cannot, as of 2026, simply demand new terms or withdraw committed money. The only requirement, he said, was that the initial investments were made by then. All right. Well, we'll see whether the Saudis have actual control over their billions of dollars and can simply disinvest or use their leverage to change the deal. Because, after all, Jared's been raising money from all over the place. Lots of different sources. Oh, wait a minute. Almost exclusively from them? Wow. The original investment by Saudi Arabia, by the way, was made only after officials at the Saudi Investment Fund questioned Mr. Kushner's experience as a venture capitalist. Before joining the Trump administration, he had been a real estate developer and had not previously been involved in large international financial deals, but the board of the Public Investment Fund, led by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, Mr. Bonesaws himself, whom Mr. Kushner had developed a friendship with while serving at the White House, overruled these objections and approved the deal, the Times reported in 2022, because he's a sophisticated investor. During the inquiry, Affinity Partners also confirmed that its planned projects in Serbia and Albania include unusual provisions that effectively make both of these foreign governments, Albania and Serbia, business partners for Mr. Kushner and Ms. Trump. Ms. Trump has said she is helping with the effort in Albania. The committee's letter says the governments of Albania and Serbia will share in the profits from what businesses they bought into there? Luxury hotel deals proposed in those countries, and the governments will be responsible for securing land use approvals needed before construction can start. Exactly the situation that Eric Adams found it would be wise somehow for him to help out with for the government of Turkey in New York. Oh, except he just got indicted. Weird. Mr. Wyden said the reliance on foreign financing and government actions leads him to question if Mr. Kushner's business operations should be subject to the Foreign Agents Registration Act, the very statute under which Eric Adams now finds himself charged. Isn't that something? The federal law requires American companies doing political work in the United States on behalf of any foreign governments, Saudi Arabia, Albania, Serbia, to file reports with the Justice Department detailing exactly how much they're being paid and any contact that they have with American officials on behalf of their foreign clients. Affinity Partners said, hey, we've never been asked to represent foreign investors to the U.S. government. Not yet, anyway. So it doesn't apply.
Kagro in the morning with David Waldman.
I think that it might, especially in the end, and especially if his father-in-law, ends up seizing power or running the government in some way. All right, time for us to exit for the week. Time now to hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. And guess what? He'll be doing his own roundup of those stories that he finds important. Stay tuned, and we'll see you next week.